Hello, everyone, and thanks to subscribers and collaborators for podcasts. The Conflict Zone is the name of this special podcast. We are with our partner, Martina Arostegui, is a renowned and highly experienced journalist, especially in military and intelligence matters, who has covered the kind of international conflicts we are now seeing deploying in Ukraine and rest of the world. He has worked for Voice of America. He has worked for Wall Street Journal, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Times, CNN, Fox News, United Press International, and France 24. And he's author of a book about military special operation called Twilight Warriors. He's especially anti-terrorism and intelligence matters. I am Dr.LLM.Christian Barrientos Ichaso. I'm international lawyer for trade, companies, and business anti-corruption compliance. Thank you all. Thank you, Martin.
Hi, Christian. How are you? Good to be on board. Good to see you as always. This week, we're going to lead off with an episode, a very disturbing episode that has recently developed in Argentina, South America. We're talking, of course, about the Boeing 747 of Iranian origins operated through the Venezuelan cargo airline Ichaso that is currently grounded at the Argentine airport of Ezeiza under a judicial order to hold it, register the cargo, and investigate its passengers, right? Security sources I've talked with in Argentina and in the United States believe that this could be the tip of the iceberg of a vast logistical network operated by Iran and Venezuela to supply and manage intelligence and terrorist cells throughout Latin America, according to some high-level counter-terrorist sources, which this channel has consulted. It could also be used to move cargo, strategic cargo that may be of use to Iran's nuclear program, according to these sources. It's feared that increasingly frequent flights by Ichaso, whose aircraft are linked to the Iranian airline Mahan Air, which the US government has designated as a branch of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, are an indication of stepped-up Iranian penetration throughout the Western Hemisphere, where Iran appears to be activating local allies in a possible run-up to a renewed terrorist offensive that could target the United States. This, according to sources in the FBI. The Law Channel has been predicting this for some time, and now it appears to be official. The Ichaso Boeing, with license number YV3531, detained in Ezeiza for over a week, was flagged down as the result of a red alarm issued by the FBI, which have been tracking its flight itinerary over recent weeks. The aircraft had been moving between Caracas, Tehran, other points in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. It was carrying Iranians, as well as a group of Venezuelans who are currently being detained in Argentina along with the aircraft. The US issued the alert as the aircraft flew between Mexico and Argentina. It was on its way back to Caracas, Venezuela, from Buenos Aires, when Uruguay denied it permission to refuel, forcing its return to Argentina, where it was grounded on a judge's order at the request of the United States Embassy. The FBI has been quoted today in the Argentine newspaper El Clarín as saying that it was a logistical flight for Iranian undercover activities. Argentine authorities, who have examined the plane's cargo as well as passengers and crew, have poured cold water over the allegations made by the US and Israel, which publicly congratulated Argentina for grounding the aircraft. The Argentine government says that the cargo consisted largely of auto parts destined for car factories that Iranian companies operate in Venezuela as part of joint industrial projects with the leftist government of President Nicolás Maduro. At least one of the Iranians has been identified as a former officer of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Special Operations Unit, Quds Force, who previously piloted Iranian Mahan air flights supplying Hezbollah operations in Syria, arming the militias in Syria that were fighting for the Iranian-backed regime of President Assad. After the officer's name was mentioned in the press, however, Argentine government spokesman denied any link to Iran's military, saying that the individual's identity traced through his passport only coincides with that of the Quds officer, and that there were two different people under similar names. Is Argentina trying to hide something? According to a former officer of the Argentine intelligence services, who has long been involved in counterterrorism, legitimate cargo shipped on M. Trasur is a cover for sensitive military and strategic material that Iran is moving between Latin America and other points in the globe. He says that terrorist support cells are active not only in Argentina, but also in other countries, including Chile, Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico. This source even mentions the possibility that the flights could be transporting heavy water for Iran's nuclear program from a factory that produces chemicals for heavy water that was recently reopened in Argentina. We cannot confirm these allegations, but the Law Channel has received information indicating officially sanctioned efforts to provide cover for the Iranians from a variety of sources. Currently serving officers of Argentina's airport security interviewed through the Law Channel say that Argentine passports are being processed for Iranians from the detained flight so that they may get smuggled out of Argentina under assumed identities. Whether or not these particular allegations are true, there are certain precedents to substantiate such suspicions. The Argentine government has so far failed to clear up the mysterious murder of Argentine prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who was found shot dead in his apartment on the morning that he was supposed to deliver his investigation into an official cover-up of Iran's involvement in the Hezbollah bombing of the Amia Jewish Community Center building in Buenos Aires, which killed over 100 people in 1994. Argentine sources that I consulted when covering the incident for the London Daily Telegraph at the time told me, somewhat similarly to now, that the hit job had been facilitated by Venezuelan Iranian agents and Iranian agents within Argentina's security services. The official government version is that Nisman committed suicide. The provision of Venezuelan identifications and identification documents and passports to Iranian, Syrian, and Lebanese suspected members of Hezbollah has been conducted for years by the Venezuelan government, according to former officers of the Venezuelan immigration services who say that they were ordered to do so by superiors. I named and revealed the identity and passport numbers of several Hezbollah-linked individuals in a series of investigative articles for the Washington Times. A report later delivered before a U.S. congressional hearing in 2015 listed hundreds of such cases. Hezbollah suspects with laundered identities are believed to have crossed into the U.S. from Mexico, according to the FBI. which recently exposed a plot to conduct high-level assassinations using Hezbollah terrorists currently believed to be in the United States. The U.S. Border Patrol also reports a dramatic recent rise in the number of individuals on terrorist watch lists caught entering from Mexico. Former counterterrorism officials in Latin America tell the Law Channel that last week's U.S. alert, which resulted in the grounding of the Ichaso Boeing 747 flight, may be part of a crackdown on Iranian-connected activities in Latin America in anticipation of terrorist strikes against the United States. Attacks could also be conducted in retaliation for American-backed efforts to sabotage Iran's nuclear program, some of whose senior personnel have been killed over recent weeks. According to airport records in Argentina, the number of suspicious flights originating in Iran and Caracas, similar to the Ichaso Boeing intercepted last week, have been coming in at a rate of 3 or 4 per month. Some sources believe, some analysts believe that perhaps the U.S. may be acting, but it may be doing so. It may be doing too little, too late. Christian?
It's amazing, incredible. That's the connection, the Hezbollah connection. All report about the Quds and nuclear program is for Latin America have a natural resource, no? Have a geographic for attacks United States and all interesting Iran, Bolivia. You talk Iran, Bolivia, Venezuela, the connection is very interesting. You know what going in this moment with the other aircraft who are flying in Santa Cruz who have connection to Buenos Aires?
I've inquired about that, Christian. In the Argentine, my Argentine sources say that aircraft was on its way to Argentina to pick up the passengers that were on board, the Venezuelan and perhaps Iranian passengers that were on board the detained airliner. But that it stopped in Bolivia. It didn't proceed to Argentina because Argentina cannot yet release those individuals, that they're still being investigated by the U.S., which has requested that Argentina detain them until the investigations are concluded.
That's evidence. All is evidence about the treaty Iran and Venezuela, Argentina, and Bolivia have that a deal with Iran in this moment with a natural resource, and this very interesting about the attacks, the Hezbollah attacks in triple border. Remember when talk about the financing, the terrorism in triple border, Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. And this moment, if have connection with Hezbollah in Argentina and Buenos Aires, no?
Yes,
we talked last podcast with the triple border, with the security and Hezbollah connection, and now with the treaty with Iran and Argentina. In this moment, is very interesting. We remember this podcast, no?
Yeah, look, the activities along the triple border have been going on for a very long time, and we're talking about something that stretches back to the 90s and possibly the 80s. There's been a lot of Hezbollah money fundraising there. A lot of Hezbollah money and Iranian money has been laundered through there. And in fact, it's believed that the attack against the AMIA in 1994 was staged out of Paraguay, that the Hezbollah cell that conducted the Hezbollah members who conducted the attack were smuggled into Argentina from Paraguay, and the payments were that went out not only for the attackers but also possibly to some as bribes to Argentine officials, also originated out of banks in Paraguay. That's been going on for quite some time. I mean, the area was cleaned up. I think the FBI made a massive effort to clean up the area after the 2001 Al-Qaeda attacks in the United States. But again, I mean, it's been never very cleaned up entirely. And in fact, but I mean, it's got to be said. I mean, the Paraguayan government was quite cooperative in trying to trace the Emirates flight, and denied its permission to land in Paraguay as well when it was on its way back from Argentina.
Our podcasts are right. The threat of a danger connection with Iran is every moment, no?
Yes, I mean it's. You mentioned Bolivia. I mean, again, there's been a lot of Iranian. There was a lot of Iranian activity in Bolivia. I mean, I remember when I was there, when I was covering Bolivia for the Telegraph and the Washington Times. There was speculation that uranium from a recently reactivated Bolivian uranium mine, which had been closed some time, but had been reactivated as a result or during or because of or coinciding with a series of high-level meetings between Evo Morales and the Iran's prime minister at the time, Ahmadinejad, that some of that material made it out of Bolivia, transported on Venezuelan military flights to Venezuela, and from there on Mahan Air flights to Iran. That is something that I was told by some very high-level sources, some very knowledgeable sources in Bolivia, both connected with the government and in the mining industry. So there's definitely a connection there, and it appears that Iran's been trying to spread its tentacles all over. I mean, years ago there was the Venezuela tried to sell Iranian arms to Uruguay. Yeah. I mean, you've got to understand. I mean, Venezuela is a virtual Iranian base. I mean, it has massive industrial projects, which State Department sources in Washington believe could be a cover for intensifying joint military projects, including the manufacture of drones. There are Iranian drones being manufactured in Venezuela, supposedly for civilian and at the most maybe surveillance purposes. But it's believed that they're right now in the process of being upgraded to models that can be used or armed with missiles. So there was an increasing military relationship with Venezuela that I pointed out between Venezuela and Iran, that I pointed out, I may add, in an article, a very, very long article, a full page piece, story, special report I wrote for the Wall Street Journal back in 2012, in which I gave specific details of the Iranian-Venezuelan connection, including the recruitment of Bolivian computer experts to work on the security side of the Iranian nuclear program that was reported and known about by the U.S.
The trip of Mexico of the plan from Iran was insured or not?
Sorry, Christian, I was a bit distracted. Could you repeat that question?
The trip to Mexico of the plan from from Iran is is some connection for this drone manufacturer, or
well, it's possible. I mean, again, I mean the Argentines have inspected the cargo on board the aircraft. They say that the plane was taking Argentine auto parts back to Venezuela for the Iranian car factories that operate there. But I have yet to hear anything about what the plane might have been bringing into Argentina. We know that the amount of passengers would be excessive normally for a cargo flight. There were 5 Iranians and I think a larger amount of Venezuelans. I think about a dozen Venezuelans. So moving from Mexico. So there's a lot yet to be explained, and the Argentine government is being less than transparent, I think, about what was on that flight.
And the first airport is Cordoba, who stayed in no? And continue to Buenos Aires.
That's right. Yes, exactly. That's the first airport was Cordoba.
Why?
And there's no report about what the plane unloaded there. And it went on to Buenos Aires, presumably where it collected the auto parts. So maybe they collected them in Cordoba.
In Cordoba.
The official explanation is that the flight came in empty to collect auto parts to be taken back to Venezuela. And so that's beyond that, we're not really sure. That's what the Argentine government says.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is the principal mercenary of the Iran president.
Well, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is the elite, is the mainstay of the current Iranian regime. Okay, it responds only to the Superior Council of Ayatollahs, and it is involved in paramilitary operations throughout the world. And its elite unit, the Quds Force, is for all effects and purposes a terrorist organization. It's been designated by the United States as a terrorist organization. It's virtually, it interfaces in every possible way with Hezbollah, trains its chief operatives, moves its arms, and finances its activities, directs its activities. Quds and Hezbollah are one and the same. And it is the main conduit for Iranian covert operations throughout the world. And it is officers of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in Quds who are believed to have directed, coordinated the bombing of the AMIA building in Buenos Aires in 1994 that was conducted by Hezbollah. That it was actually directed, coordinated, and prepared by the Quds officers operating out of the Iranian embassy in Buenos Aires.
That's the real connection with Hezbollah. That's the real connection. How's the financing Quds or financing the Islamic Revolution Guard? With the public source?
Well, I mean, it's obviously financed by the government of Iran. But again, Christian, when you think of these organizations, I mean, who are active all over the world in all kinds of clandestine activities, they probably develop their own channels of finance. I mean, they run their own companies. They run their own business operations. They're probably involved in all kinds of illegal activities, human trafficking, drug trafficking. In fact, good God, a member of the Iranian security official in the Venezuelan government, Tariq al-Saimi, has been designated as a member who is active in Hezbollah or as a member of Hezbollah, has been designated by the U.S. government as a drug trafficker, as being involved in laundering drug trafficking money. So, these people are very, very, I mean, they have extensive sources of financing aside from also being financed by the Iranian government. So these organizations have no lack of funds and can operate at a very, very wide scale.
Yeah, we remember. I remember we talk about the SUN, the group of SUN or Los Soles of Venezuela. That's the connection with the vice president and minister Tarek al-Salim.
Sure, I mean, he's a link between Hezbollah and the Venezuelan drug trafficking cartel de los Soles, which is virtually run by high level by Venezuela's general staff. It's run by Venezuelan generals who have turned Venezuela into a base of cocaine trafficking throughout the world. I mean, not to the United States, to Europe, and probably elsewhere.
That's the evidence of the Nisman when he investigated the case of AMIA in Buenos Aires, all investigated about the connection with Iran, no? And in this new case of the prosecutor Pesci of Paraguay, is some connection with the Hezbollah or not? Or is PCC some connection?
You mean the Paraguayan prosecutor that was shot in Colombia? Well, we don't know, Christian. I mean, it's there is, I think, some very vague connection possibly with a with a Hezbollah operative who was arrested in possibly in a Paraguayan by Paraguayan security services some time ago, but it's not clear. I mean, I wouldn't draw any. Certainly, there is no evidence of any direct link between his assassination and Hezbollah or Iran at the moment. I wouldn't. Basis upon which to arrive at that conclusion.
Part of the group is Venezuela. One guy who shot him is from Venezuela, I think so.
Is that right? That's interesting, Christian. I have not been following that case. When did that come out? When was that mentioned?
Yeah, very interesting case. In this moment, the president of Mexico is changed the roadmap of the security. He have deal with Venezuela in the arena in the case for approve the treaty Venezuela-Iran for 20 years. For why? Mexico support Venezuela, and Venezuela have a new deal with Iran government.
Well, that's as you know, I mean, in the recent during the recent summit of the Americas conducted in Los Angeles, the the president of Mexico, Manuel López Obrador, didn't show up, presumably in solidarity with Venezuela, because the United States didn't invite Venezuelan President Maduro, who of course was off in Iran signing new deals with the Iranian government. Venezuela has been one of the Latin American states which has been least critical of Venezuela. Mexico has traditionally been one of the Latin American states that has been least critical of Venezuela, and if not sided against the U.S. with Venezuela, it has certainly been, played a neutral role, tried to play a highly neutral role in the conflict between both countries, and tried not to appear to be too hostile to the radical socialist government of first of Chavez and then now of Maduro. However, I think under the very lenient and permissive policies of the Biden administration, which has tended to, which is even trying to, speaking about lifting sanctions on Venezuela, some sanctions, so that it can draw some oil from there through the oil company Chevron, which wants to activate new contracts with the Venezuelan government, or activate activities that it already has going in Venezuela. Perhaps Mexico has decided, well, now is the time to get even closer to Venezuela, for a variety of reasons. Economic ones, perhaps oil, and perhaps also due to Iranian pressures.
Iran president. And now in the new scenario with the new president of Chile, the Boric, is possible to have a new treaty with Iran or not?
It's possible. I mean, Chile could move in that direction. The fact is, I mean, one of the all of Latin America could be moving in that direction. I mean, again, it's nebulous. I mean, you've got a lot of new left-leaning governments in Latin America, and left-leaning governments tend to be pro-Iran. They tend to be accommodating towards Iran. They tend to have closer relations with Iran. But I mean, they are fence-straddling up to a point. And the fact of the matter is that when the U.S. intervenes forcefully, like in the case of this Embraer flight, and they do cave in to U.S. demands. When the U.S. clearly states, when they say clearly and forcibly and publicly that they want certain measures taken against Iran's penetration of the region. Most governments, excepting a few, obviously, except Venezuela, certainly would not agree to any kind of such U.S. request. Certainly neither would Nicaragua if the situation arose there. But until now, other governments which fence straddle, like Argentina, which try to maintain, for whom it's important to maintain good relations with the United States, have tended to agree, at least in some part, to U.S. demands. They do the minimum. I mean, Argentina did hold the flight. Okay, they are allowing investigations to go ahead into the aircraft and the passengers and crew who are continuing to be detained in Argentina and are not being released. It's possible that they may release them surreptitiously if this goes on much longer. It's possible they may be doing things to launder their identities, to launder their activities, and doing perhaps the minimum they can to investigate them, and maybe even blocking investigations by security agencies of the United States and Israel and other countries. But at least to some extent, they have to follow U.S. directives. I mean, it's, the situation is not lost altogether yet. In most of Latin America. In Venezuela, certainly has. In Nicaragua, certainly has, but not in most other countries, I believe.
And Cuba, too.
Well, not to speak of Cuba.
And Cuba, new Cuba. Yeah. What's going on Russia in this moment with Ukraine and Nicaragua, and new troops in Nicaragua and continue the wars in Ukraine?
Yes, I mean, there have been reports of recently reinforced Russian positions in Nicaragua. This has been going on for quite some time. As you know, there's a great deal of Russian hardware in Nicaragua. There are Russian tanks, there are Russian gunboats, there are Russian radar stations, along with some Russian military personnel, who I believe have increased over recent weeks or months. You've got to bear in mind, I mean, I think that Russia could be positioning itself perhaps to support, maybe some move in America's backyard, in an area considered America's own neighborhood, to offset American support, of course, for Ukraine on Russia's border. So, and elsewhere in Eastern Europe. So I think that has been in the cards for quite some time, and that's another aspect that could be activated. Along with increased Iranian activity in Latin America, perhaps there may also be Russian activity to support anti-U.S. operations. That's something that's going on. And it's likely to continue because, from all indications over the past week, as you know, I've been doing been tracking very closely what's happening in Ukraine. Certainly not moving beyond a stalemate. And there are indications of increased U.S. support for the Ukraine, increased military support. I mean, the U.S., in addition to all the aid it's already given Ukraine, including hundreds of long-range howitzers, which are key to blocking any further Russian advances, is now, I think, President Biden has just signed another $1 billion worth of military equipment, military aid to Ukraine. Britain has also told the Ukrainians that it is going to step up its delivery of arms to the Ukrainians, as well as training of Ukrainian forces, which Britain has already been conducting through the Special Operations Unit, the Army Special Air 22nd Special Air Service Regiment, which is currently present in Ukraine. So indications are that Britain is stepping up. The British and the Americans are stepping up their aid to Ukraine, even as other European members of NATO start talking about maybe de-escalating their support for Ukraine, de-escalating their military support, and push Zelensky towards a negotiated solution with Russia. Try to encourage him to take that line. I don't know if this is necessarily a disagreement between NATO partners, or whether you've got the Europe playing good cop while the Britain and the US play bad cop with Russia. But I certainly while there's increased talk of negotiations, I believe that's eventually where the matter will be settled, and that I don't see an outcome in which Ukraine doesn't have to concede at least some territory. Russia already controls 20% of its territory. It's the military support to Ukraine from the US and the British continues at very important levels.
That's good. That's good news for continuity this protection for civilian Ukrainian civilians. For conclusion, thank you, Martin. What is your conclusion in this moment about this news?
Well, my conclusion, Christian, I think I'll just end on my conclusion that the purpose of this podcast, and I appeal to subscribers and listeners to continue tuning in, and if possible to help us sponsor this podcast, is to give an overview of events throughout the world, focusing on aspects on the underside of the news, which much of the rest of the media either neglects to see, or perhaps even isn't necessarily interested in investigating. And we look at the underside of the news, as well as giving the global perspective on news, and we point out intrigues, schemes, which others may be hesitant or perhaps may lack the analytical capacity to trace. And as I say, we don't dwell in conspiracies, but we don't deny that they exist. Thank you, Christian.
That's good. Thank you all. Subscribe and share this podcast. Thank you, Martin. See you next week with podcast The Conflict Zone.
Thank you, Christian. See you next week. Bye.